Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Pet Logic podcast. I'm Corey Childs, owner of Pet Logic Animal Training, a certified professional dog trainer, and hopefully podcaster extraordinaire. We are going to be getting into all things dogs, training, behavior, care, and so much more. I may even touch on some cat things and other topics if the interest is there, so definitely let me know. I'm going to do my best to make it as straightforward and understandable as possible for both pet parents and other trainers alike so that all the concepts are useful for everyone involved. In today's episode, I'll be telling you a little bit about myself and what makes me credible to give you any sort of advice, and in that same vein, I'll be talking about what to look for when choosing a trainer for yourself. Whether that's to work directly with or just to take advice from online, because let's be honest, the world of social media is full of people who are entertaining and film well, but don't really know the first thing about behavior science, or sometimes even what they're talking about at all. Also, a quick note that for platforms that allow it, I will drop in the timestamps in the show notes or the description so that you can jump straight to that finding a trainer part if that's why you're here. But to start us off, who am I and what's my background? I say this not to brag or rattle on about myself, but because people ask me, and because it is important to understand your trainer's credentials if you're going to trust their advice. I'm the primary owner of Pet Logic Animal Training, along with my lovely wife, Rachel. I share my home with a big, lovable Pyrenees, a crotchety cattle dog terrier mix, a geriatric angel of a cat, a deaf ferret hell-bent on stealing everything in the world, and a Senegal parrot who sounds suspiciously like a smoke alarm with a low battery. Currently, I work with dogs, cats, and the occasional bird in the greater Seattle area, as well as virtually, and I'm also a Catch Academy mentor, which is one of the few schools that teach dog training as a curriculum. We've been operating here since 2019, which unfortunately was followed immediately by the pandemic, but all's well that ends well, I suppose. Now I'm busier than ever, so it all worked out in the end. Originally, I began my animal career in Tennessee, working in a shelter there where I would do training, assessments, triage of their overall care, vaccines and blood draws, stray intakes, all sorts of things. I wore many hats back then. Well, I say back then, but honestly, I still do. That never really goes away in the animal field, and I think anybody in it can probably attest to that. I was also an intern with the Chattanooga Zoo for quite a while, where I got to work with some incredible and very knowledgeable zookeepers. I was able to work directly with their chimps, spider monkeys, many of their large cats, the fennec foxes, African crowned cranes, all sorts of things. It was really that experience that led me on to Moorpark College, where I got my degree in exotic animal training and management, and also where I happened to meet Rachel, the love of my life. For those of you who aren't familiar, the EATM program, that's EATM, Exotic Animal Training and Management, a hilarious acronym considering, though thankfully no one has been eaten there, at least not to the best of my knowledge. It's a one-of-a-kind program with an on-campus zoo and where the vast majority of zoo operations, including the training, enrichment, feeding, public education, and outreach, and overall animal care, is all done by a small group of very dedicated students. When I started, I believe they accepted 52 applicants a year, and by the time I graduated, our class had dwindled down to the mid-30s. Somewhere around 36, I think. Regardless, it was the smallest graduating class in something around 10 years, ever since the zoo moved up to a different location and got a whole lot bigger with a whole lot more animals. In addition to the zoo management, medical, and conservational coursework, there was a huge focus on training, practice, theory, and application. So with all that, I've trained and cared for a pretty large variety of species, including dogs and cats, of course, various parrots, cougars, lions, hyenas, red foxes, coyotes, falcons, kestrels, turacos, beavers, monkeys, donkeys, ferrets, rats. The list goes on and on. Now that's important because although the specific techniques sometimes vary, though not as often as you would think, the underlying principles are the same no matter what you're training, whether it's a dog, a dolphin, or even a human. I get asked about my time there a lot, and while I trained many things, some of the ones that jump to mind immediately are crate training a very bolty coyote and working to integrate her with a new partner that had arrived. Rachel and I worked together with a pair of really nervous red foxes and were the first to successfully have them voluntarily crate and be transported to a new enclosure. We actually also trained a beaver a voluntary blood draw behavior, so she would hold on to a bar while I flipped her tail over to draw blood from it. There's a vein that runs down through there, all voluntary with no restraint. There were plenty of fun and show behaviors too, but there was a big emphasis on training behaviors that allowed them to assist in their own care and decreasing any stress that they may have with it. Willow, the beaver we worked with, was actually a rather interesting one. She had a very strong and docile relationship with my wife and I. We could go in with her, work in her enclosure like I had mentioned. She would even allow me to stick her tail with a needle and draw blood. All entirely force-free, inside of her enclosure with her, but she absolutely had it out for our poor co-trainer who couldn't even go inside really without her being crated, or she would charge her, try to bite her. It was definitely an important study in the importance of trust and relationship with that animal, and believe me when I tell you that you do not want to be on the receiving end of beaver teeth. There was also a very dedicated group of us that would show up extra early each morning to walk our mountain lion around the zoo, who also not only got daily fluid injections, but would also allow that blood draw behavior from his tail. There was a lot of flight training with the birds, just so many things that we did. I had an externship in Colorado working with wolves and wolf dogs, and even got to fly to Japan to work with Hiroshima Animal Care College, who does dog training, agility, grooming, and things of that nature. So in addition to the professional dog training credentials, which I'll get to, I also hold that degree in exotic animal training and management. And an important note here is that all the training we did was voluntary and free of pain, fear, or intimidation. We never needed to force an animal to do anything, and I follow that same philosophy when training dogs as well. But regardless of all the amazing types of animals I got to work with, I did realize during that time that it was dogs and behavior work where my passion really was. I worked for several years at a dog boarding facility as one of their trainers before we moved here to Washington. Here, I was the adoption lead at Paws Animal Shelter for a number of years before transitioning into their animal care lead. I did that for almost 6 years or so before opening my training business full-time, and in fact, I still occasionally do help them out. I also sponsor free lessons for many of their more difficult or long-term dogs and cats, so it's still a very close working relationship I have with them. While some trainers come from that sports and competition world, I really come from a shelter world, which I feel like is pretty relevant to a lot of my clients. So I've worked directly with probably tens of thousands of dogs and cats at this point, many of whom have significant fear or aggression issues, have trouble adapting to a home, integrating with other animals, along with all the usual suspects of potty training, leash manners, reactivity, stress-related behaviors, old bad habits, the list goes on. There are several other organizations in the area I work with as well, but considering many of you listeners don't live here, I want to get into our next topic of the episode, which is how to find and vet a reputable trainer, be it in person or online. The vast majority of people looking for a dog trainer don't really know how to choose. The average owner doesn't know that much about dog training, and by extension, doesn't usually know what to look out for when choosing a trainer that is right for them. And I'll be the first to tell you that there is nothing stopping anyone from owning a business as a terrible trainer, and that experience only proves so much. You can do something very badly for a very long time. The problem being that dog training is largely an unregulated industry. It's really the Wild West out here, at least in the US. Pretty much anyone can call themselves a trainer or a behaviorist, and there's nothing stopping them from using questionable methods or even outright scamming you, so choosing wisely is important for both you and your dog. And the very first thing you need to decide is what kind of help you need and from whom. There are a myriad of lesson options that may suit your needs, and every trainer is different, so the options are just all over the spectrum. So consider if it's an issue primarily in your home, or if your dog is reactive or fearful to other people or dogs. While group lessons can be very cost-effective, they won't solve the majority of in-home behavioral issues. They're great intros into basic techniques and obedience work, but only for certain people and in certain situations. There are options like board and train, which can be a great option if you have to leave and board your dog anyway. They're very good at getting the repetitions out of the way needed to teach new skills, but again, they're not very good at solving specific behavior problems. And even if you do a board and train, I would definitely still make sure that there is a lesson with that trainer at the end so they can kind of show you everything. Online options and virtual training are also great tools, but of course they have their limitations as well. All that is to say, it's just important to sit down and assess your needs and what type of training might be right for you. I will say I do virtual work with a lot of clients, and it can be great for a whole lot of situations, and especially if you don't have a trainer near you. But again, it's not the absolute best for every situation, so you can always reach out to a reputable trainer if you have questions on what might be right for you. But it is nice to have an idea of what your needs are going into the hunt, so you just know what you're looking for. So once you know what type of training you need, or you at least have a general idea, your next step is choosing a trainer. There are 3 primary titles you will hear, which is trainer, behaviorist, and veterinary behaviorist. Pretty much anyone can call themselves either a trainer or a behaviorist, and in many ways they are used interchangeably, or at least with very little consistency. You want to find someone accredited through a reputable, that's the key word here, reputable, organization, which I'll get into in a second, but these are going to be the right fit for the vast majority of people. Your other option is a veterinary behaviorist, which, as the title implies, is a certified veterinarian with additional education in training and behavioral modification. They are highly qualified to diagnose problems and can also prescribe medication. Veterinary behaviorists tend to be harder to find, though, and more expensive, and often they are consulted for more severe or abnormal cases or ones where medical assistance may be helpful. Think severe anxiety, OCD, sometimes aggression, things like that. It's not uncommon for a trainer to refer clients to a veterinary behaviorist if they think it's warranted, but again, for most cases, a trainer or behaviorist is going to be your best option unless you do fit into one of those more extreme boxes. So, how do you know if your trainer is qualified? Well, generally, they will have specific credentials listed after their name. For me, that's CPDT-KA, or Certified Professional Dog Trainer Knowledge Assessed, as well as my EATM, my degree in Exotic Animal Training and Management. In the US and Canada, there are several reputable organizations that certify trainers after various testing and proof of knowledge and skill. They all have searchable directories on their website so you can double check your trainer as well. The list of organizations and titles is rather extensive, so while I'll cover them quickly here, I'll also put a link in the description to my blog post which will lay it all out for you. For anyone curious, my dog training accreditation comes from the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers. I also hold that degree in exotic animal training, which is often seen for trainers in zoos, aquariums, and other such organizations. But getting into the list itself, reputable organizations you may see include the Academy of Dog Trainers, the American College of Veterinary Behaviorists, the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior, the Animal Behavior Society, Catch Academy, the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers, that's mine, the International Association of Animal Behavioral Consultants, Karen Pryor Academy, and the Pet Professional Guild. There are also a number of other international and UK-based organizations, all of which are equally as good. I'll try to cover them on that blog post as well. I want to say here too that there are a number of membership organizations related to training, such as the Association of Professional Dog Trainers, but there's no certification requirements to be a member. Anyone can join as long as they pay the membership fees, so while it shows interest in education and professionalism, it doesn't actually prove anything by itself. If you're interested in a trainer and you don't see that string of letters after their name, definitely check their website or media and see what their credentials are. So once you find a trainer you're interested in, the next step is to look at their website and media and likely even reach out to them directly. You want to ensure that the trainer's methods and ideology align with what you are comfortable with. For example, while I use a wide range of techniques, my philosophy is always that they are free from pain, fear, or intimidation. So, some good questions you may ask are: what their formal education and credentials are, especially if you can't find them, and what sort of continuing education do they do? Those reputable organizations do all require continuing education to keep that accreditation, so it just helps prove that they're keeping up with the field. While the question, what techniques do you use, is a little ambiguous and depends highly on the dog, you can instead ask questions like, what happens if my dog gets something right, and what happens if my dog gets something wrong? What sort of equipment do you use? For me, prong collars, shock collars, or e-collars, as they're also called, choke chains, or other such equipment are all red flags. You may ask what sort of scientific evidence they have to support any claims made about behavior. A reputable trainer should easily be able to talk about operant and classical conditioning, conditioned emotional responses, the quadrants of operant conditioning, and so much more. Don't expect them to give you a seminar on it, but a knowledge base is important. I also don't expect you to know what those things are, and of course this question is very ambiguous, very open-ended, but suffice it to say that they should be able to cite sources or tell you where the research comes from for any claims that they are making. You may ask, do you have experience with my particular breed or issue or training goals? And that's not to say that they have to have experience with those particular things. There are tons of different dog breeds, which actually varies by country. As many issues as there are dogs under the sun, and as many training goals too. So it isn't that they necessarily need that exact experience. It's just nice to know where they're coming from, especially if you're having a very particular issue. This is maybe more important for things like aggression, severe anxiety, anything like that, where it really does help if they have that specific skill set and experience. And always feel free to ask more questions, but don't expect your trainer to walk you through your issues without actually hiring them or to spend an hour on the phone with you or email without a consultation fee. That's not fair to them and is an unrealistic expectation, though many trainers, especially if they have their own facility, will let you observe a class either for free or for a nominal fee. You wouldn't bring your dog and they wouldn't work with you directly, but you could observe. That would be worth asking as well. I'll cover it more in depth in a follow-up episode as well, but there are some red flags to look out for. A lack of reputable training credentials. Again, experience alone does not equate skill. The use of pain, fear, or intimidation and the tools that cause them. Talking about becoming the alpha, forcing dogs to submit, a balanced approach, being the dominant, being the pack leader, or demanding respect. A note here that dominance is a behavioral phenomenon worth discussing, but to be the dominant is not a thing. Usually it's just a justification for abuse. Demanding money without actually answering your questions. Not allowing other family members. This one is highly dependent on the situation, but generally, as long as it's safe, practical, and reasonable to do so, I like the whole family or house to be involved. There are, of course, some issues with very small, loud, or distracting children, too many people, etc. But if it's only ever a single person allowed, that's a red flag outside of specific small-scale workshops, educational courses, things like that. I'll cover more on it in the next episode. And of course, anything that makes you feel uneasy about working with them. Trust your gut instinct if you feel something is off. Personally, I'm very open about working in an accepting, inclusive, and flexible environment, and I feel like you shouldn't hesitate to ask if you have questions or you need accommodations. One thing I also want to make clear here is that if you are coming from a place where you may have used more aversive techniques, or maybe you simply didn't know that there were kinder alternatives, that should not matter for a good trainer. For example, will I ask you to take off your prong collar and advise you on alternative equipment? Absolutely. Will I degrade or berate you for not knowing any better or not knowing that there was other equipment? Definitely not. Ask questions. I'm always open to a civil dialogue. That being said, if my clients won't follow my direction and are overly argumentative, sometimes we just weren't meant to work together and it is best to part ways. If I'm in a park training with you and you're shocking your dog for not listening, that is a direct reflection on me, my business, and my practices, especially in such a public space. It is exceedingly rare, but it does happen. So while you shouldn't hesitate to mention how you've worked with your dog before, I do want you to be open to change if that's the case and you've used these more aversive methods. Again, there's no shame, but be open and honest with your trainer. My last bit of advice here is that finding a trainer is a lot like finding a therapist. Sometimes it just doesn't click for whatever reason. There's no shame in moving on to another one if it's just not working despite everyone's best effort. So, that is it for the very first episode of the Pet Logic podcast. I hope you learned a thing or two and enjoyed your time here. Our blog is growing quick and full of all kinds of great info as well, and the occasional accompanying article to a podcast like today, so be sure to check that out. And finally, I would love to hear your thoughts on today's episode, so please drop a comment, like, or rating, whatever is a thing on the platform you're using. Give your dog a treat for me, and I'll see you in the next episode.